Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman. I hope everybody's doing well. Once again, sorry for the brief hiatus of about a month. That was definitely not a part of the plan. I broke my finger and it sort of set me back, but I did get a lot of recording done. So let's cover some Elder Scrolls today, because it's been a while since I've done that. One of the main factions of Oblivion is the Mages Guild, and unlike the other factions in the game, you actually have to get a recommendation from each guild hall to fully become a true member and gain entry to their exclusive university. Now, after you get your staff, you'll notice that things kind of go to shit rather quickly for the Mages Guild. I mean, some of this was foreshadowed in the requirement quests, but it's clear that the Mages Guild itself doesn't seem to have a good grip on things. You've got tenured guild heads killing associates and plotting with necromancers, while other ones station their subordinates in isolated caves just for annoying them. You've also got guild halls managed by inept social climbers who only get positions because they're friends with the arch-mage. Now, what I'm trying to say is the guild-wide incompetence that we're seeing on full display here in Oblivion, it has a source. And unsurprisingly, it's the new guildmaster, arch-mage Hannibal Traven. And I know, especially if you've played Morrowind, that it certainly seems like the Mages Guild doesn't have a great track record as far as its archmages go. And I will say, Trebonius from Morrowind is actually probably a much worse leader than Traven, but he's also probably a much better magic user, and overall a more funny character. I don't want to get too off subject, but Trebonius, he's like a complete idiot in the most hilarious of ways. He's not frustrating like Hannibal Traven is in Oblivion. Pretty much any Mages Guild member you talk to in Vvardenfell has this hilarious story about some ridiculously impossible thing that Trebonius casually asked them to do, expecting some form of results, like find the Dwemer, or catalog every plate and bowl in Vvardenfell, or my favorite, asking somebody to build Chancellor Okato a new Anumidium, since the original seems to have been destroyed in all those troubles in Iliac Bay, the warp in the west that doesn't have a clear definition of what happened, which itself was essentially the events of the previous game, Daggerfall. Another thing that's interesting about Trebonius, in comparison to Traven, is that no one speaks highly of him, except for one person. Of course, that one person is secretly a Telvanni spy, and it makes it even funnier because of all of Trebonius' anti-Telvanni stances and his pledge to root out any spies in his organization, which shows us that the Telvanni spy is just stroking Trebonius' ego in order to get close to him and, premium access, for lack of a better term. Overall, I think it would probably be more fun to cover all of this when I finally get to a video on Morrowind's factions, but with this character, he was only promoted to get him out of the Cyrodiil Mages Guild. Overall, he's a much more fun flavor of ineptitude than the subject of today's video, Cyrodiil's own archmage during the events of Oblivion. In general, the Mages Guild in Morrowind just had a bit more character because of the different quest givers and their personalities and all the different jobs they'd have you go do. For example, in Vvardenfell, a chapter steward might ask you to steal a rare book from a colleague at another chapter just to see its contents, and then has you return it before it gets noticed missing. Other stewards use their positions to settle old scores with either the Telvanni or just in general people that they don't like. Then you've got the lower ranking members sabotaging each other for promotions while occasionally getting wanderers to do all of their work for them, and other high ranking members hiring vampires to kill people. It's really quite something. But I believe again that it has more to do with the setting and perhaps, if I may be so bold, the writing that makes it contrast so much with Cyrodiil's Mages Guild in Oblivion. Either way, it is a bit unfair to compare them since they are in a completely different setting. Morrowind is a sort of hostile environment towards outsiders, and Cyrodiil is the cosmopolitan heart of the Empire, where pretty much everybody has the same shot at everything. Or, so they say, but I'm getting off topic. Anyway, back to today's topic. Hannibal Traven. He's basically a hero to the guild mages like Magister Carahil of Anvil, herself quite famous for seemingly putting down the infamous necromancer Lorgren Benerus about a century ago. Although it's worth noting that even a staunch supporter of his like her will acknowledge Traven's social climbing tendencies. Favor for a favor, quid pro quo type deals made to advance his position. But for what it's worth, that does seem like it's par for the course for the Cyrodiil Mages Guild. A lot of the guild magisters talk like this. So maybe Traven's just playing the game the way everybody else was, and he was just better at it. Also worth noting that while Carahill supposedly excels at rooting out rogue mages and necromancers, there's been at least one that's been operating under her nose for quite some time. None other than Anvil's own castle mage, Baralorn, is an accomplished necromancer, even if he has to keep it a secret, and he seems to have been meant to have played a larger role in the game. But if nothing else, I think it highlights how ineffectual Hannibal Traven's necromancy ban has been in Cyrodiil. I mean, you've got this castle mage who secretly practices necromancy, and he makes a visit to the Anvil Mages Guild at least once a week, a guild that is in fact run by Carahill. So it seems that Carahill's gotten a bit rusty in the intervening years since she defeated Lorgren Benaris. But we're not really here to talk about Carahill today, we're here to talk about Traven. One of the many things that we hear from the guild members is that in addition to banning necromancy, Traven also placed restrictions on new members of the guild. Basically, he's the reason we have to get a recommendation from every single guild hall sans Kvatch to access the Arcane University. This seems reasonable on the surface. I mean, regulations on stuff like magic is good in theory, and they can't just let anyone in. That would certainly be irresponsible. Plus, there's nothing wrong with demanding a bit of effort or tribute in order to gain privileges. That's how guild advancement works. Although sometimes paying one's dues is quite literal, like in the case of Morrowind. But all of this in its current form under Hannibal Traven, all it really does is promote more of a favor for a favor attitude within the guild, effectively restricting one's access if they don't play ball with this particular policy. His new system also doesn't do very much to encourage the study of actual magical endeavors. In fact, it sort of just ignores that pursuit. Compare this to the guild advancement system of Morrowind, where members had duties, but they also had to actually progress their magical crafts, polish their abilities, if you will, in order to advance in rank. Traven's system does not require its members to actually learn, it only requires them to perform tasks in order to rank up, and his recommendation system is essentially an introduction on how this new version of the guild works for any prospective members hoping to join during Traven's tenure. On top of all that, though, closing the doors of the university to the public is only going to create more of a divide between the average people and the mages. When you look at it from this perspective, Traven seems like he's remarkably anti-common man, because he's effectively putting a monopoly on knowledge in Cyrodiil and excluding anybody who doesn't want to join his guild. And those that do have to play ball with his new requirements and new regulations. But I guess you gotta remember, he doesn't expect any actual demonstrations of magical ability or even knowledge from his prospective associates. He just needs to know that they can do what they're told. He probably figures that by excluding all but those who really want access to the Arcane University, it will, result in a higher quality of scholar that's produced there. His Mages Guild effectively wants to control all of the knowledge without adding to it at all. And sure, we saw this behavior in Morrowind with Rhanis Atheris not allowing anybody who wasn't registered with the guild to give out magical training or advice. In fact, she'd probably order their deaths if she found out such a thing. All Traven's really done has add more hoops that an individual will have to jump through in order to get some form of magical education. In a way, he sort of added this extra layer of, bureaucracy and literal legwork that anyone seeking knowledge in Cyrodiil is now going to have to go through just to gain a higher education. For example, if a scholar from, say, another province wanted to research something at the Mystic Archives, something that only they had access to, then, now they have to make a trip all across the province doing favors for preoccupied and sometimes incompetent guild stewards in order to get on their good side just so that they can gain entry to the now heavily restricted university. Again, I'm not saying that they should just let in any average idiot. And sure, the recommendations are some of the better quests in the faction, but surely there's gotta be a better policy. I mean, what was wrong with the one in Morrowind? Plus, a lot of these stewards tend to put their new recruits in harm's way, sometimes intentionally to humor or amuse themselves, in other times unknowingly. But the truth is, one could easily get killed while running one of these random-ass errands, and for what? Just so that they can read a book in an arcane library? I mean, come on, that's not really a fair trade. Although, to be fair, most of the time, the errand you have to run is just something that the guild steward couldn't be bothered with. But still, I mean, the guy just became arch-mage and he decides to make all these changes. I guess it takes balls. Now, it's important to remember with necromancy, that it was never something that was openly embraced by the guild. It was sort of just something it allowed some of its members to do in the safety of their own caves and dungeons, but they weren't breaking any laws. They were allowed to buy corpses, soul gems, and conduct research as they saw fit, free from legal persecution. And technically, necromancy is still legal under the Cyrodiilic law. It is only the Mages Guild that has banned its use. So yeah, the banning of necromancy is what he's most known for, but he's done plenty of other things with his rather short tenure within the Mages Guild. Right off the bat, one of the first things we're told about him from various sources within the guild itself is that half of the Council of Mages, the top wizards of the guild, resigned when Traven was appointed as arch-mage, as well as several regular members. So it's clear that he was a controversial choice to run this guild, and that explains why the council is so small when we see it in the game. That in itself has put a certain strain on the remaining members of the Mages Guild Council. One of them is secretly only there to undermine Traven's reign, and the other one is so overworked, dealing with the fallout from this necromancy ban, that he has no time for his own projects, his own actual Mages Guild work, like the Alien Ruin stuff you have to help him with. In fact, you, the new recruit who's at the center of all this, has to help the one loyal council member that the guild has. It's not like he can go himself. He presumably has to make up for the work of the other half of the council that resigned. But because he seems old school, he seems loyal to Traven because he's the arch-mage. This guy, he does what he's told by his superiors. And again, we already know why Karanya stuck around. And I have to imagine that this instance of half of the appointed council mages resigning after a new arch-mage is selected is a bit uncommon. But why could this have been? Perhaps some of the council members just assumed that he was going to be making all these policy changes and decisions without consulting them. Perhaps some of them agreed with Alysa de gra-Kogg's arguments in Hannibal Traven's The Black Arts on Trial. And as we see throughout the Mages Guild questline, he consults with the remaining council members, the ones loyal to him in his decisions. He does this frequently. In fact, a handful of quests you'll have to wait a whole day in between because he has to consult with these unseen council members. So he does seem required to take their thoughts into consideration, and there seems to be some voting process behind decisions that are made, but we're told very little. And as for half of the council members just straight up leaving when he became arch-mage, I have to assume that at least, in my opinion, a small part of them questioned Hannibal Traven's own magical abilities. And look, I know gameplay-wise he knows like several unique and powerful spells, but we never see him use them. The only way you're actually going to see any of these cool spells and attacks he does are if you aggro him by attacking him. But I felt like it should still be mentioned, because if I don't say that he had all these unique spells, someone surely will remind me. But I think that the average player would be forgiven for not knowing that, seeing as how we literally never see Traven do any magic except for at the very end of the quest line when he immolates himself. But to be fair, we're here to analyze his actions, not so much his capabilities. Plus, this is Oblivion. As we all know, you don't have to know any magic at all to become Archmage in this game, so why should he? But I guess that's kind of a null point anyway, because he does know magic, we just never see him use it, and he doesn't act particularly wise like you would expect an Archmage to act. So let's get to it. What has this guy done for the guild? We hear a lot about how he banned necromancy and how it's been this big controversial thing. This is his one major contribution to running the guild as far as I can tell. And again, you might agree with Traven's sentiments about these so-called dark or black arts. I mean, necromancers are generally bad, and in a lot of provinces that's extremely frowned upon to be one, like in Morrowind for example, because, you know, they worship their ancestors. Although in that case, they do seem to only take issues with the foreigners that do that, you know, raising the dead. The Dark Elves have no problem with the summoning of their racial purist great uncle ghost to literally kill you for being a foreigner in Morrowind. I mean, that is literally an inborn trait of all Dark Elves, the ability to summon the ghost of their ancestor to protect them. So obviously it goes without saying that there's some wiggle room on the subject, even when it comes to the ancestor-worshipping Dunmer, who, again, worship their ghostly grandparents. But then again, for whatever reason, the Mages Guild never really seemed to have a problem with ripping ghosts from a presumably peaceful afterlife, or at the very least rest, and forcing them to fight for them as a sort of summoned serpent. It's a bit odd. Ghosts are fine to use, but skeletons and zombies, well, no, that's all necromancy. I know it's technically conjuration, but here's the thing. That's all necromancers in Oblivion use, is conjuration, and they summon skeletons and zombies. There's only 2 resurrect corpse spells in the entire game, and one of them is on Mannimarco's staff at the very end of the Mages Guild questline, and the other one is in the Shivering Isles. It's called Risen Flesh, and you get it after finding all of the skulls and returning them to the ghosts of the Hill of Suicide. Ultimately, though, this is just another example of the Mages Guild's hypocrisy. They have no issue with summoning ghosts who we've seen numerous times throughout this game series to still possess their wits and personality, but they have a problem with the summoning of decrepit, rotting corpses and shambling skeletons who are presumably mindless, at least to some degree. Definitely more so than any wraith or ghost, that's for sure. Yes, wraiths aren't entirely who they were before death. They're sort of like what would happen if the spirit of that person held on to this intense bitterness they carried in life. That would result in them becoming a wraith, at least from my understanding. So still far more possessing of a sense of self than, say, a zombie. How often has a zombie or a skeleton talked to you in these games? You could probably count it on 1 or 2 hands, if at all. How many times has a ghost talked to you in one of these games? It's a completely, countless. You can't even name all of the times a ghost has spoken in these games. So why can't Archmage Hannibal Traven see any form of this nuance? I mean, is he going to ban a dark elf for summoning their ancestor ghost, something that's, again, an inborn trait of every dark elf? He has a very black and white outlook on necromancy and probably many other things as well, but there's a reason for that. It's because he's built his entire political profile on this anti-necromancy stance, so he has to outwardly view everything as black and white. He's effectively appealed to the super-religious imperial population's fear of the undead and the devious raising of the dead. I mean, this is a guy who got famous for publishing a book adequately named The Black Arts on Trial. As we can see from just the title alone, there's already an inherent bias at work here with this book. The work presents itself as providing an even-ended argument for and against the controlled teaching and use of necromancy within the guild. He claims to play the mediator in this debate between 2 much more experienced wizards, but as we've already shown, Traven has a proven anti-necromancy agenda at work, so how could we ever look at him as neutral in this argument? For example, look at the book. It's quite literally called The Black Arts on Trial. It already primes one to expect the obvious conclusions that he reaches at the end of this very shallow attempt to validate his stance. What's funny, however, is that if you actually read the book, the advocacy for teaching necromancy argument is the one that makes the far better points, and the wizard arguing against her just sounds like an out-of-touch Puritan. For context, the acclaimed mage that's arguing in favor of the supervised teaching of necromancy within the guild is none other than Alysa gra-Kogg, a famous former initiate of the mysterious Psijic order of monks and possibly the only orc to ever join their ranks. Truly a prodigious individual, even if she was too wild to stay in the order. She ultimately left the Psijic order for the Mages Guild and helped rebuild Orsinium in the Second Era. She also viewed the Psijics as too rooted in tradition and the old ways, and that they tended to favor Ultimer over the other races, even though all were welcome as initiates. She greatly preferred the freedom and respect she got from working within the Mages Guild to the condescending and restrictive monks of Artaeum. So in the magician scene, she was a pretty big deal, if a bit controversial. The other magister that's debating her, I admittedly know very little about. He's from elsewhere, and he basically acts as a mouthpiece for Traven's own stances. That's not to say his arguments don't make any valid points or hold any water, but it mainly centers around what the public would think if, the Mages Guild openly embraced necromancy, which is not even what they're arguing. That's not what Alysa is arguing, and it makes it frustrating in the end when his word is decided as the right one. But ultimately, we don't really know anything about this guy except that he's from elsewhere and that he shares Traven's politics on the dark arts. Alysa, on the other hand, we can actually meet and speak to and get a general feel for her character. And yes, a person can change after a few centuries, but let's look at her arguments here. Earlier I brought up the Dunmer and the country of Morrowind and its attitudes towards necromancy, and it works here as an example too, because in the various iterations of Dark Elven religion, they're known for the use of undead like skeletons, bone lords, and the very famous strength-draining bone walkers to protect their ancestral tombs and other temple burial sites. As you could probably guess, these are undead, but they serve a purpose and are venerated within the temple. Shit, the Dunmer even resurrected their cultural hero Nerevar's bones. They turned him into a bone walker, and it's a very sacred thing. See, the Dark Elves, they really only have a problem with necromancy, which again is an extremely broad term, when it's being used to desecrate the remains of their ancestors. And the use of undead within a religious church system isn't exclusive to Morrowind. This is also something we see to a degree in Cyrodiil as well, at least with the Imperial Cult Chapels, what with the sanctified wraiths guarding the Undercrofts. It's probably why there is no outright ban on necromancy in Cyrodiil. And I think it's mainly because the term is used too broadly, because the average peasant hears necromancy and they just think evil mage, dark wizard. It makes arch-mage Traven's ban on necromancy seem a bit silly and like it panders to the common superstitions regarding necromancy and magic in general, because clearly some degree of church-approved necromancy is used to bind those chapel spirits to the Undercroft, and sure, they're likely the restless spirits of those who were interred there, but it isn't generally seen as this bad thing. Some people die with unfinished business and are unable to rest peacefully, so at least their vengeful wraith can serve a better purpose guarding the tomb from people who would like to rob from them. I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but if necromancy as a whole was better understood, for example, if people knew that some form of it went into the religious rites and other things that they were already cool with and willingly go along with every day, then it would be better understood and perhaps even to some degree accepted. I'm not talking about the rogue mages that go necromancer and terrorize the countryside and, become a nuisance to the various settlements across Tamriel. That should be rightly stamped out and, eradicated, but it's also all the average idiot knows when it comes to the word necromancer, so perhaps they should be educated more. Perhaps if they were better educated on the subject by, say, the Mages Guild, then necromancy as a whole would be better understood and less feared with such, let's face it, primitive superstitions. But no, what does the Mages Guild do? It doubles down on all of those superstitions and makes people fear them even more, announcing to the world loud and proud that they condemn necromancy, showing the peasants that they too hold superstitions, and while the population might not always trust mages, they can trust the Mages Guild as opposed to necromancers, right? I don't know, that's just how it comes off. And look, that's all Alysa de gra-Kogg really is arguing here in this book. Just for it to be better understood, as opposed to burying their heads in the sand and allowing all the rogue necromancers to make all of these magical breakthroughs. I mean, before long, the Mages Guild could find itself quite outpaced by the necromancers if they choose to just operate in this way. And sure, she's somewhat dismissive to Master Voth Karlas's concerns, but definitely not more so than they are to hers. Ultimately, stuff like this is left up to the player to decide how they feel about, because they can't really do anything about it. Not in a game like Oblivion. Not a whole lot in the way of choice in that game, as much as I love it. But here's my takeaway. Perhaps I'm biased, but I agree with gra-Kogg. I think she's being completely reasonable. I don't see a raving fanatic, a slave to the dark arts as she's later derisively called. I just see a seasoned professional pragmatically arguing for the supervised teaching of the dark arts so as they could be understood and better defended against. So look, Alysa has been around for several centuries by the point of this book's publishing. She's had literally multiple lifetimes worth of experience practicing magic under her belt, and obviously she makes the stronger argument here. This was basically the same issue she had with the Psijics, and ultimately why she left the Order. They were too rooted in their old ways, this black and white view of it all. Necromancy was bad because of Mannimarco, and any who attempted to learn or understand the dark arts fell victim to its temptation and became slaves to it. That's how they saw the world. As Alysa would put it, they had a very short-sighted view of things. And the Mages Guild questline does prove her right, because understanding how Mannimarco works would be key to defeating him, as Traven would later learn before the end of his life. But anyway, back to this debate of theirs. What's funny is that the opposing master, Magister Voth Karlis, tries to act like she's basically telling them that she wants to raise an army of the undead and take over the continent, when all she's saying is that in order to understand it and better counter it, they need to be familiar with it. They can't just treat it with blind fear, which is admittedly exactly how they treat her once the revelation comes up at the end of this book. They're too concerned with what the public may think about them embracing necromancers when, the public doesn't even understand the nuances of what a necromancer is. To them, a necromancer just means bad mage. But these nuances are moot when dealing with people like Traven and Karlis because they either don't understand them or they have no desire to. To them, the word necromancer being synonymous with an evil mage or an apostate or just a bad mage is exactly what they want. That's exactly how the world should be in their eyes. And for the Mages Guild to, again, openly embrace necromancy would be admitting to the world that the Mages Guild as a whole is evil. There's no nuance to any of it. That's how they see it. And for all of Traven's talk of valuing Alysa's arguments here, I feel like they heavily attempt to invalidate her in the end, pretty harshly and definitively. In fact, I think the only reason this book was published in its current form was because Alysa turned out to be a necromancer, which again isn't specified on at all. We have no idea what the evidence was. We're just told that she was outed as a practitioner of the dark arts and that all of her points were just in service to her slavery of said black arts, so they therefore can't be taken too seriously or genuinely, even though Traven graciously decided to present them in his book as they were. You gotta love how the book even mentions that they have every confidence in the replacement magister that they've sent down to Orsinium. And it's like, yeah, no surprise there because the guy is directly in their pocket. He was handpicked by either Traven or Karlis. It doesn't matter if he's actually competent or not because he's loyal to Traven and Traven's interests. Frankly, they probably don't care what he does with the Orsinium Mages Guild as long as he backs them when they need it. And we've already seen the effects of this type of leadership in the Cyrodiil Mages Guild as well, but we'll get to that later. The book really does read kinda hilariously at the end when you take all this into context because he talks about how he still included her arguments and all this, but it's only because the outcome supports his views. The advocate for necromancy was outed as a necromancer and driven from the guild. Of course he's going to include that. And of course he doesn't miss the opportunity to invalidate all of her points as saying that they were just in service to her, love of necromancy. The revelation of her being a necromancer absolutely makes his side of the argument look like the valid one, and he even has his stooge come out on top in this so-called debate in the book. This book ultimately served one purpose, and it wasn't to inform people about the dangers of necromancy or how it's debated within the halls of the guild. No, this book was simply designed to be his jumping-off point for his anti-necromancy themed bid to become an arch-mage of the Cyrodiil branch. He's so much more politician than mage that we actually never really see him do any actual magic. All he does is spew viewpoints from his books and project faux confidence. He's basically, what's that guy, Gilderoy Lockhart from the second Harry Potter movie, if I'm remembering that correctly. But just relax, let's take a closer look at how he's running the guild. So his version of the Mages Guild claims some sort of moral superiority with its bans and policies, but it seems to have very little regard for the average people that it's trying to pander to. For example, during the Thieves Guild quest with the Stolen Staff, we see exactly how Traven communicates with one of the captains of the Imperial Watch, regardless of who's around to see it. So again, Traven talks this huge game about banning necromancy so as to gain the trust of the public people, the average idiot, but where's that operating logic here? He sends a Dremora to send a letter to the guards. I mean, seriously, so skeletons are all bad, but a literal armored demon is fine in his mind. Because it's not necromancy, it's not a corpse, it's not undead. Never mind that Daedra were actively invading Cyrodiil at the time. It really makes his dislike of necromancers and necromancy in general come off as a sort of straw man. Just something to burn in service of building his career on top of it. And what's even worse is that he lucks out in the end of this questline since the King of Worms comes back, but that's literally just a coincidence. He was aware that a cult dedicated to the King of Worms had become active in Cyrodiil, but he chose to not make that his priority and generally just assumed that banning necromancy would make the problem go away. A lot of what he says is sort of inconsistent. During one quest, he'll tell you how he's been aware of the growing necromancer activity in Cyrodiil for some time. But then 2 quests later, he's like, I thought necromancy had all been stamped out, even though his, his undercover agent, his Donnie Brasco, had been killed and turned into a zombie. And he still very clearly had informants in the guild, so I don't really see why he would think it's been stamped out at this point. I mean, we just talked to him 2 days ago, and the situation was pretty dire. Of course, that's only after you tell him Mannimarco is back, so maybe his mind's kind of jumbled at that point. He clearly had no idea that the King of Worms himself would be coming back to Cyrodiil, at least during his tenure as arch-mage. Probably not a good feeling. He literally just thought that banning necromancers would keep the average forest or cave necromancer away from the cities by, inciting this ban. And of course, it would also accomplish the public embracing the Mages Guild in a way that they never had before. Again, at least that seemed to be his goal. Instead, all he really accomplished was basically provoking the necromancer's demigod into bringing ruin upon the guild. Of course, you'd be forgiven for thinking he's just some barefoot asshole. Which is one thing that I always thought was funny about this questline. I mean, this dude is hyped up throughout the game as this monstrous demon lord of the necromancers. And when we finally see him, it's like, this is Mannimarco? He looks more... This is Mark. Because like supplementary lore and later depictions like an ESO paint him as sort of looking like Elric of Melnibone or Bloodraven from A Song of Ice and Fire, or better yet, one of the members of the Wild Hunt from The Witcher 3, when in Oblivion he just looked like this, some random old Altimer hobo. A guy who doesn't even use magic in his boss fight, he just pulls out his dagger and starts swinging away. I mean, he doesn't really feel like a necromancing demigod at all, he just feels like some regular mage who isn't even using magic. But that's probably a subject for another video. Anyway. And we see throughout the questline just how negative of an effect on the guild that Traven's had. Not only did half of the Council of Ruling Mages resign when he took office, but one of them stuck around for the express purpose of subverting his rule, or his reign, or his tenure. I'm talking about Karanya, who he just was completely oblivious to the entire time. I mean, we're talking about one of the top mages in Cyrodiil, a part of the council, who was deeply loyal to Mannimarco and the Necromancer cause. And she served directly under this guy who was supposed to be the Necromancer Hunter, the guy who he put his foot down, he put a stop to the dark arts. Again, we really see him doing very little. It seems like he just has Raminus Polus and everybody else do his job for him. Sometimes it was even his policy to do nothing in the face of a threat or danger. That's the thing though, he was just completely out of his depth when dealing with the Order of the Black Worm. His hubris allowed him to think that he knew all that they were up to, but he really had no idea of the full extent of their operation. He certainly wasn't one step ahead of them like he thought he was. In fact, they were a couple steps ahead of him. He had no clue or inclination of how large the cult had grown since he was too busy with his whole reforming of the guild. For example, later on he asked the player to extract or eliminate his undercover agent Mucianus. See, as Traven will tell us, he and the other council members, all 2 of them, had been aware of the worm cult's activities in Cyrodiil for a while, but they had a plan to sit back and watch it unfold because why not? Why do anything? Why take a credible threat seriously when you've built your whole platform off taking a stand against necromancy, and here they are making a stand against you and you do nothing? Well, it turns out that the Worm King saw that as weakness after, Traven had been beating on his chest with the whole necromancy ban, so once Mannimarco had the cards in the right places, he starts going at the guild. But anyway, prior to the attacks, Traven and the council had sent an undercover agent to go into the Necromancer's Worm Cult ranks and feed the guild information. A Lonnie Jung to Traven's Luthen Rail, if you will. And this worked for a time until the reports became spread out and sort of sporadic, and Traven and the others began to question the validity of his info, since the guild was getting attacked left and right without seeing it coming and with no warning from their undercover agent. Presumably, they figured he had either been burned, was broken, or had switched sides, so something would have to be done. They ultimately decided to send a group of battle mages, which is tricky since their agent was still undercover. They didn't exactly know his status, and he could very easily have been killed, which wouldn't be good if he was still loyal to the guild, so they were either going to have to save him, arrest him, or kill him, but unfortunately for everyone involved, the agent had already been tortured, killed, and resurrected. Because again, the Worm Cult is a step or a couple steps ahead of the Mages Guild with its own informant or undercover agent. It's sort of like that movie The Departed. The Mages Guild had an undercover with the cult, and the cult had an undercover in the guild council. It's honestly no wonder the Mages Guild couldn't get anything done, even if it tried. It basically had everything working against it: an incompetent arch-mage, traitorous council members, and an adversarial cult that knew all of its moves. Any good that the guild agent Mucianus had did before his death was likely thwarted in some part by Karanya, the undercover council mage, so really it was just a whole bunch of nothing. But anyway, once again, Traven needs his mess cleaned up for him, and we get to experience this hilarious moment when we're sent to go deal with the problem. Right before his comical death, he mentioned that the necromancers knew that the mages were coming, so the battle mages didn't have much of a chance, as the cult at Neon Twill was tipped off by Karanya, the real reason that the Worm cult was so successful at striking at the guild so often and easily. So again, the whole operation was fucked before it even began, because Traven didn't understand the scope of the cult's power or the true nature of his enemy as much as he liked to believe he did. They had infiltrated his inner circle and he was completely unaware. I mean, he looked like a complete idiot to his enemies. And he never really even discovered Karanya's deception either. He makes an offhanded comment right before she does, enact her betrayal when she ran off with the necromancer amulet. But for all the time prior to that, he had no idea. He completely trusted her with his plans, with his actions, probably with everything. I mean, she was a trusted member of the council. And no wonder the necromancers had been able to stay one step ahead of the guild this entire time. Not only did they have Falcar and other people like that, they had a council member, Karanya, someone who was directly in the room with Traven on a daily basis and was privy to most of his plans and knowledge, I'd imagine. And probably all it took was just a little bit of positive affirmation on Karanya's part to make Traven feel comfortable with banning necromancy and doing all this stuff. Because it wasn't until she ran off with the necromancer's amulet that he began to slightly have a suspicion about whether or not she could be falling a victim to the dark allure of necromancy. But little does he know, she's already fully on board and a member of Mannimarco, the King of Worms' cause. It's just kind of hilarious to think about. The direct consequences of Traven's rule are sort of symbolized by the state of the Mages Guild at the end of the questline, where the entire Mages Guild's ruling council is dead and the highest ranking person left is you and Raminus Polus, who was only spared from all this because he had administrative duties to do back at the Arcane University. In the end, Traven does the only thing he's good for and dies so that we can go kill Mannimarco, and I'm left wondering what we, the player, are supposed to feel about him. Is this his redemption? I mean, he didn't really do much, but I guess it is. His leadership nearly brought about the end of the guild, not to mention the necromancer epidemic, which his policies no doubt exacerbated. Despite his sacrifice and being key to the defeat of Mannimarco, I do still think that Traven left the world a worse place than when he came into it. The questline in general feels a lot shorter than the other ones, but I think that's because of the recommendation quest, because you have to do all of them before you become an official member, and there's one for basically every city besides Kvatch and Imperial City. The questline post recommendations does feel like it goes by pretty fast, but it doesn't diminish the importance of those first 8 quests, which really do a great job of world building and sort of foreshadow the many problems that plague the guild throughout the questline, as well as just its overall state at the start of the game. It's a good primer into understanding what you're getting into by joining the Mages Guild. Now, yes, of course, some of the stuff we deal with in those quests doesn't factor directly into the Mages Guild storyline, but other stuff definitely does, like the stuff with Falcar, Jean Frizoric, or Falcar's betrayal, all that good stuff. And all of that does a really good job of hinting at what's to come. And basically, none of it was good. Under his leadership, the guild has literally been imploding. We see all kinds of fucked up shit. His guild had high-ranking members that were secretly necromancer sympathizers. We see stuff like Falcar, the Cheydinhal top mage, going full Billy Bones from Black Cells and just straight up killing his former guildmates traitor style. The necromancers also had a spy in the court of Skingrad to keep a tab on the Count because of his guild ties. He acted as an informant, and if they could prevent guild members from accessing them, then that was successfully thwarting the guild. Let's go on a brief tangent and talk about the Skingrad job in particular real quick, because it's yet another example of the unique way that Traven runs the guild. So as we already sort of touched on, the Cyrodiil Mages Guild has an agreement with the vampiric Count Hasseldor of Skingrad. He provides them with information and assistance when they need it, and they don't expose his vampiric nature. I know, such a lovely relationship that feels nothing like blackmail. The guild obviously has all the power in this deal, so what choice does the count even have but to comply? So anyway, when Traven was put in charge, he was made aware of this deal, and because of his paranoia and the count's rampant vampirism, he instantly suspected Hassildor as being in league with the necromancers. Since they were on the rise, they must have had somebody backing their plays. Full-on paranoia, plus he was making judgments on a man he'd never met. He just assumed because he was vampiric and because of the blackmail-y style of their relationship that the Count must be in league with the necromancers since they were working against the guild. But I guess in Traven's defense, it's a sort of fair assumption. I mean, the guild's relationship with Hassildor is said to be tenuous at best because of the one-sided nature of it. I mean, they're basically holding a gun to the guy's head and forcing him to be their ally. But the guild does send people to help him out when he requests it, so I guess that's got to count for something. Again, their relationship is said to be, tenuous. What's funny about this task, though, is how Traven goes about assigning it to a complete newbie. And it isn't even just any new recruit of the university, it's quite literally the person who happened to witness the massacre at Wellspring Cave where the mage's staffs are built, or I guess, grown. I know it is sort of main character behavior for the main character of the game, but still. Basically, right after you witness this massacre and create your staff, get fitted for your apprentice robes, you're sent off to Skingrad under false pretenses to unknowingly commit espionage against a Count. He sends you down there to assess the situation by uttering a code phrase to the Count, who's supposed to reply with another code phrase that keeps the player, the new recruit, in the dark as to the nature of this relationship and the situation. We see how it played out. Again, this could have really easily gotten an incompetent apprentice killed in more ways than one, which would kind of make Traven a little better than Falcar, who, knowingly gets his associates killed for annoying him. Anyway, in one of my most favorite examples of this game, we see a team of what I'm going to assume are inexperienced battle mages get completely wiped out by necromancers. I really like how this little wood elf acts like he just survived a Vietnam-style ambush, and then just promptly goes and dies. And also, let's not forget our very first assignment given to us by the Arcane University after we've completed all of the necessary recommendations. We're told to just go make our own staff and it should be this fun experience, but that is not what we get when we get there. The Sacred Grove, where new mages have their staffs made, got attacked, and the wizards in charge of the area were ritually slaughtered by necromancers, who then try to kill the player. And again, all of these necromancers seem really emboldened by the fact that Traven had banned necromancy. In fact, they seemed like they were pretty pissed off about that fact, and possibly it could be the sole reason they were targeting the guild. But anyway, the individual guild halls seem largely self-governed, so he can't be blamed for how some of the magisters run them like their own little miniature fiefdoms, but Arch-mage Traven is directly responsible for the Bruma guild hall's poor leadership and indirectly responsible for its eventual destruction. See, he appointed Jean Frizoric to the magister position simply because he owed her a favor and was her friend, and we see how the other members of the guild hall feel about that. They aren't happy and they mostly just fuck with her and play pranks on her all the time. Not exactly a great work environment and not one that's conducive to making significant magical breakthroughs or discoveries, although the invisibility spell was pretty successful. This sort of quid pro quo behavior and hiring friends and repaying favors and all that, it's a pretty commonplace practice within the Mages Guild, so much so that Hannibal Traven might not even be entirely responsible for it. It's part of just the culture of being in this guild, although he was exceptional at playing the game. And I think this indirectly can explain why someone who potentially has no magical ability, like a player character who doesn't specialize in magic, can still become the arch-mage. It's because advancement doesn't have anything to do with magical ability, it has to do with this whole favor for a favor type of environment that the guilds become. So I guess there it is, advancement has nothing to do with skill at all, it has to do with competency at accomplishing tasks that are assigned to individual members. And this is obviously a bit different than, say, Morrowind's Mages Guild, which only advances you if you meet the proper skill requirements. So a combination of that and friends in the right high places are likely what got Hannibal his promotion to Archmage. It's worth noting that he's close friends with at least 2 of the head magisters of the respective guild halls of Cyrodiil. It's not uncommon for a local guild head to remind you not to forget to repay those who helped you get into the university once you make it there if you decide to bring up the topic with them. And never mind that you already have to do a favor for almost all of these guild halls just to get the recommendation in the first place, and they're already reminding you to pay back the favor of the recommendation. They would prefer to just continue down a never-ending line of favors for favors. But Traven seemingly exploited this practice within the guild to his own end, but Jean Frazoric's eventual death is very likely on Traven's hands. They say heavy lies the crown, but goddamn, I feel like this guy had no idea how bad his decisions would fuck the Cyrodiil Mages Guild, and it was all for maintaining his anti-necromancy politics and his relentless social climbing. The only reason it had a worthy outcome of the defeat of the god of the necromancers was because there was a really competent player character that had just joined the Mages Guild to fix all of Traven's fuck-ups. Honestly, I think it's tough to say whether or not the guild ever fully recovered from his leadership, since it only existed for another 170 years before it was disbanded and replaced by the Synod. At the end of the day, I really don't know what the takeaway from this character is. Yeah, he was right about the necromancers coming back and ultimately being a threat, but that might be one of those self-fulfilling prophecies, you know. He made this whole grand stand against necromancy, banned it, turned half of his guild against him, and made it really easy for many Marcuses to come in and infiltrate and subvert the hell out of his guild. I genuinely think it's the reason that he came back to Cyrodiil specifically, because he wanted to prove a point. He wanted to make an example out of Traven for his grand stance against necromancy. And he almost succeeded too, but in the end, Traven gets to be remembered as a martyr who died for the safety of the guild and gave the protagonist a chance to knock off the King of Worms. He got his wish. He's going to be mentioned in the history books alongside his hero, Vanus Galerion, but at what cost? And sure, some might say that Traven was playing the long game by banning necromancy and rooting out all these necromancers in the guild so he could draw out the King of Worms to kill him. But I think we know from the questline and from Traven himself at multiple times during the questline that that is not the case. He goes back and forth as to whether or not necromancy is a problem in Cyrodiil or if he believed it had all been stamped out. He definitely didn't think Mannimarco was coming back. So that's what I mean, he really lucked out in the end, and all that he had to really do was die to accomplish his goal. So I guess the takeaway is that you could inadvertently luck yourself into success at possibly a great cost. And I'm sure there's more of it than that. Experts would probably be able to derive more meaning and more understanding of his whole arc than that, but I've always wanted to rant about this character in video form ever since I was like 15 and had problems with him, so here we are. But I think that's everything I had to say about why the Mages Guild is so incompetent. It's leadership. That's the main problem. Namely one Hannibal Traven, but I think we know that by now. Oh yeah, one last thing though, I almost forgot. Hannibal here gets a mention in one of the works of my favorite fictional author, Waffen Jarth. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He's the Breton author that wrote A Dance in Fire and the Argonian Account, amongst a few other books. I think there's quite a few other books. Now, in this particular one we're talking about right now, The Exodus, which is about these parents hopelessly trying to heal their sick kid who has been stricken with something that the temples, chapels, and even the Mages Guild couldn't cure, they end up turning to necromancy. But yeah, it's quite a good little story, as is basically everything that Ted Peterson has wrote for these games. And the main subject of the video, Hannibal Traven, does get a mention in this, which makes sense since the title is a reference to the Exodus that took place when he became arch-mage. All of the necromancers, at least the really violent ones, presumably left Cyrodiil or went into hiding. He gets directly mentioned by an old necromancer lady, and they talk of him as being a well-meaning but foolish man. They do all agree, though, that the King of Worms will have the last say on the matter in the end, which, as we've discussed, doesn't actually prove to be so. I know this is a last-minute addition to the video, but I just like how the subject of necromancy is portrayed here in this story. It's like a Faustian answer to the couple's prayers. You know, they have to make this bargain. I won't spoil the ending, but it's a good one. Plus, the story's only like 10 or 15 pages, and it's really well written. A quick, enjoyable read. Now, not quite the Odyssey that is A Dance in Fire or the Argonian Account, but a nice piece of world building nonetheless. All of those books, of course, I recommend, and I also recommend anything else Waffen Jarth or Ted Peterson has written. It's all just very good. I mean, I can't get enough of those in-game lore books. Anyway, I believe that was my final tidbit. Yeah, this turned out to be longer than I thought it would be, but that's Oblivion's Mages Guild. Now, in general, the guild is more complicated in Morrowind because you've got that hilariously inept guildmaster I mentioned. Seriously, he's one of the funniest characters in the game for obvious reasons, but you've also got guild heads like Rannis Atheris, whose operating procedure is more cutthroat and opportunistic than, say, House Hlalu's most brutal members. Her quests are some of the best, but there's always this layer of shadiness to her jobs. Maybe I'll cover it next because, seriously, she's hardcore. Oh, this person can't pay their guild dues? Kill them to send a message. Oh, this guy won't defect from House Telvanni to join us and let us in on all their little secrets? Kill him. Or my personal favorite, I need you to escort this scholar from point A to point B, but honestly, I want their notes and I don't really care if they ever make it to point B, you dig? Basically telling you to kill them for their notes. I guess this kind of makes sense for her character considering this takes place in the Balmora chapter of the guild, which is where House Hlalu is based. The Mages Guild doesn't fuck around in Morrowind, mainly because they're operating in a foreign country, so they have to be a little more firmer of hand. At least when it comes down to dealing with some of the native elements like the House Telvanni mages or the Kimona Tong. Because the dumber are playing rough, and if you don't play rough, you're going to get, steamrolled over. It makes complete sense. Look, I think it's safe to say that the Mages Guild was the weakest of all the main factions in Oblivion. It had very little to do with actually being a mage and mostly just running errands for a failing organization. The best parts, in my opinion, were the recommendations and, of course, the university itself, but at least there's a semi-lore reason for the guild's overall incompetence, Hannibal Traven. Although, unfortunately, the questline does make someone as legendary as Mannimarco come off as quite the weakling, ultimately defeated and outplayed by an inept dead Breton. And, of course, an avatar of Shor or Shezar, or however you want to view the main character of Oblivion, a guy who mantled Sheogorath. So yeah, without the help of the literal mad god, the Mages Guild would have truly been doomed. Although I guess you could say that about the other guilds of Oblivion as well, except for maybe the Thieves Guild. They probably would have just kept going along as they were, having worse and worse luck, but the other guilds would definitely have been out of play if not for the main character's involvement, which is again a far cry from how things worked out in the Morrowind guilds. Seems like every guild in Oblivion had a crisis, but that's a topic for another day. The Mages Guild also lacks a memorable character that all the other factions tend to have. For example, you got Owen from the Arena, you've got Modred, Orion from the Fighters Guild, Lucian LeChance, and some of the other lesser members are even pretty memorable of the Dark Brotherhood. Thieves Guild's got a handful. You've got Amuse, Methridel, the two Doyens, and of course the Grey Fox himself are all quite memorable. But who does the Mages Guild have? I mean, Raminus? I think Tarmina is really memorable and cool, but she's also a part of the main quest, and a lot of her dialogue that I'm thinking of is coming from that, as opposed to the brief little interaction you have with her during the Mages Guild questline, which is still pretty good. She's still pretty memorable in that as well. But I think she's most remembered for her role in deciphering the puzzle within the Mysterium Xarxes commentaries. And I suppose there's Raminus Polus too, but he may as well be a robot, like a C-3PO kind of greeter bot. He gives you the first few missions at the Arcane University, and he is behind sending that Dremora messenger to Hieronymus Lex, although it was probably on orders from Traven. But he's like the opposite of a memorable character, in my humble opinion. So stuff like that could factor into why the Mages Guild seems like it's the weakest of all of the factions. Now, to be fair, there is one pretty interesting, memorable, and cool character who is involved with the Mages Guild questline, but he's not a member. Count Janus Isildur, one of the coolest NPCs in the game, but his relationship with the Mages Guild is sort of under duress. He's sort of forced to give them information and be their informant, otherwise they'll expose him. But he seriously rocks. Of course, we cannot count him, though, because he is not a member. But his quests, at least the second one, along with the recommendation quests, I think make the Mages Guild as a whole worthwhile. It's definitely not the best faction in the game, that's for sure, but at least it's got some pretty decent rewards. I still think that the Thieves Guild is probably the best when it comes to those. And I know many people would say the Dark Brotherhood, and it does indeed have Lucien Lachance, some of Wes Johnson's best work. But I'm going to say it's precisely that does the heavy lifting in that quest line. It's basically sort of a microcosm for all of Oblivion, in that Wes Johnson's voice acting becomes the most memorable part because of just how damn good it is. But look, I keep getting off topic, and that's really all I wanted to say about the Mages Guild. And again, it's already longer than I thought it was going to be. Now, of course, if I missed anything or misremembered anything or got anything wrong, please let me know in the comments. I always like discussing stuff with you guys there. And as always, if you liked the video, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about these various random topics, please consider subscribing. We're really building quite the following here. And again, if for whatever reason you want to help me support the channel, I have a Patreon that I'll link in the description, and I also have YouTube memberships. But that's enough e-begging for now. Let's have our outro and then some final thoughts, shall we? Haven't heard that song in a while. So as always, I got a lot of cool stuff planned, but this one just is a video that's been on my mind, and it's like fully formed, been in my head for like months now, and I wanted to just get it done since the Oblivion remaster's out now and all that good stuff. But coming down the pike soon, we've got my Fall of Avalon video, the upcoming Dark Souls 2 video, then there's that bonus one I mentioned. I got a lot of stuff that's in various stages, but several of them are near completion, so we should be having some new videos to watch here pretty soon. But as always, I'd like to thank you guys for your continued support. I know I occasionally have these little month-long hiatuses because life just keeps getting ahead of me. We will eventually be back to a normal uploading schedule soon, I hope. But yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, and that I got a lot of cool stuff planned. I've also been playing Night Rain. What's everybody think about Night Rain? That's a good question to leave in this video. I'm really enjoying playing as the Executor, or is it the Executor, or whatever. You know the guy, the guy who looks like Sir Alon and should have had a Sir Alon skin as his alt. I don't know if I'd say he's my favorite, but he's up there. Him, the Iron Eye, and the Duchess are the three I've been playing the most, although I've been really meaning to try out the Raider. I played him my first go, and I think he was too slow for me, but now that I understand the game a little bit, I'd like to check him out. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I'll have a pretty, a more relaxed video focusing on my thoughts on Night Rain coming up pretty soon too. It might come out before all the aforementioned upcoming videos, so stay tuned for that. But I think I've been rambling long enough. I hope everybody's doing well, and if all goes to plan, you'll be hearing from me very soon. So until then, be safe, and I'll see you.